There exists a warrior in the 41st millennium who has fought for longer than most chapters have existed. A man who has led his brothers through 15 centuries of unending war, who has stood against demons and xenos and heretics across 1,000 battlefields, who has earned the respect of Primarchs and the fear of humanity's greatest enemies. His name is Commander Dante, and he is the oldest living space marine in the Imperium. Not ancient in the sense of those entombed in dreadnought sarcophagi, their shattered bodies sealed in walking tombs, but alive and active and still leading from the front after more than 1,500 years of service. He wears a golden death mask modeled after the face of his Primarch, Sanguinius, at the moment of his death aboard the Vengeful Spirit. The mask is more than mere ornament or honor. It has become his face, the visage that common Imperial citizens know when they speak of the golden angel who descends from the heavens in their darkest hour. Children on 1,000 worlds grow up hearing stories of the warrior in gold who has saved entire sectors, who has held the line when all others fell, who has burned away the darkness with righteous fire for longer than their great-great-grandparents have been alive. But behind that golden mask lives a man who is unspeakably weary, a consciousness that has witnessed too much suffering, participated in too much slaughter, lost too many brothers to the grinding meat grinder of eternal war. Dante has fought and bled and killed for 11 centuries as chapter master of the Blood Angels, leading the sons of Sanguinius through some of the most brutal campaigns in Imperial history. He has seen the vileness of the alien and the heresy of the mutant. He has witnessed the sin of possession and slain demons whose very existence should be impossible. He has done all of this while carrying a burden that would crush lesser men, a secret knowledge that keeps him fighting, even when he longs for nothing more than the peace of death. In the scrolls of Sanguinius, ancient prophecies written by the Primarch himself before the Horus heresy, there is a vision of the end times. A golden warrior stands between the Emperor and the darkness, holding the line in humanity's final hour. Dante believes with absolute certainty that he is that warrior. This prophecy is the only thing that prevents him from succumbing to the ennui that threatens to overwhelm him after 15 centuries of war. It is his curse and his purpose, the chain that binds him to a mortal existence he has long since ceased to enjoy. When the galaxy was torn in half by the formation of the Great Rift, when the Imperium was split into two realms separated by a storm of warp energy that made travel and communication nearly impossible, it was Dante who was chosen to lead the dark half. The returned Primarch, Roboute Guilliman, walking among mortals for the first time in 10,000 years, looked upon this ancient warrior and saw something that moved even his transhuman heart. He named Dante Lord Regent of Imperium Nihilus, effective ruler of half the Imperium, the warden of a realm drowning in darkness where the light of the Astronomicon cannot reach. This is the story of how one man, already carrying the weight of 15 centuries, took upon his shoulders the fate of half the galaxy. It is a story of duty that transcends hope, of loyalty that persists even in despair, of a warrior who has lost his faith in humanity's ability to prevail but refuses to surrender, because surrender is not in his nature. It is the story of the oldest space marine, the golden warrior of prophecy, the chapter master who saved the Imperium Nihilus not because he believed he could win, but because someone had to try. The man who would become Commander Dante was born Luis Dante in 447 on Baal Secundus, one of the two moons orbiting the Blood Angel's homeworld. This was not a birth of prophecy or obvious destiny. There were no signs in the heavens, no miracles to mark his arrival. He was simply another child born to the Salt clans, those hardy humans who eked out a miserable existence on a radiation-scarred wasteland that should never have supported life at all. Baal Secundus is a world of extremes, a desert moon where the very air tastes of metal and poison. The surface is blasted by radiation from the dying star that Baal orbits, turning the landscape into an endless expanse of salt flats and rocky badlands, where temperatures can swing from freezing cold to boiling heat within hours. The Salt clans survive by moving constantly, following ancient migration patterns that take them to temporary sources of water and shelter. They live in conditions that would kill most humans within weeks. Their bodies adapted through generations of exposure to an environment that actively seeks to destroy them. Luis Dante grew up stunted and small, his growth hampered by malnutrition and the constant bombardment of radiation. His mother died giving birth to a stillborn brother when Luis was still young, and his father Arias forbade him from attempting the trials of the Blood Angels. These trials, known as the Angels' Fall, were the only way off Baal Secundus for the young men of the Salt clans. Boys who survived the journey to the Blood Angels' fortress monastery and passed their brutal tests would be transformed into Space Marines, becoming angels of death who would leave their mortal lives behind forever. But the trials killed the vast majority of those who attempted them, and Arias had already lost his wife. He would not lose his son as well. Luis obeyed his father for a time, but the call of something greater gnawed at him. He was not content to live and die in the salt wastes, to spend his existence struggling for survival in a place that offered nothing but suffering. When he was old enough, he left in secret, setting out across the great salt waste toward the distant mountains where the Blood Angels made their home. He did not tell his father he was leaving. He simply walked into the wasteland with nothing but determination and the desperate hope that he might be something more than what his birth had made him. He nearly died. The great salt waste is vast beyond comprehension, a dead seabed that stretches for hundreds of kilometers in every direction. The salt reflects the sun's radiation with murderous intensity, turning the landscape into a burning mirror that can blind or kill travelers who are not careful. Water is more precious than life itself, and Luis had brought nowhere near enough for the journey. By the third day, he was crawling rather than walking, his lips cracked and bleeding, his vision swimming with hallucinations born of dehydration and desperation. That was when he saw the Sanguinius, the legendary guardian angel of the Blood Angels, appeared before him in a vision, a figure of golden light and crimson wings who pointed the way to salvation. Luis followed the vision's guidance and found water, a tiny spring bubbling up through the salt crust, just enough to keep him alive for another day. Whether this was truly the Sanguinius or merely a hallucination spawned by a dying brain, Luis never knew for certain, but he believed it was real, believed that some divine force had marked him for a purpose that transcended the limitations of his birth. He survived the great salt waste and reached the Blood Angels' fortress monastery. He survived the Angels' Fall, the brutal trials that tested every aspect of his physical and mental capabilities. He showed no special promise during these tests. He was not the strongest or the fastest or the most skilled, but he possessed something that could not be measured by conventional metrics. He possessed an absolute refusal to surrender, a core of determination that burned so brightly that even the darkest challenges could not extinguish it. The transformation from human to Space Marine is agonizing under the best circumstances. For Luis Dante, it was a year-long nightmare. After receiving the gene seed of Sanguinius and undergoing the surgeries that would rebuild his body into something transhuman, he fell into a coma that lasted for months. During this coma, he cried out in his sleep, screaming names that should have been unknown to him. He spoke the names of fallen primarchs, of dark gods that should never be named, of banished demons from the earliest days of the Imperium. The chaplain Malaphael, who oversaw his induction, was disturbed by these utterances, wondering what visions plagued the young aspirant's unconscious mind. When Luis finally emerged from the transformation, he was no longer the stunted boy from the Salt clans. He was brother Dante of the Blood Angels, a warrior whose body had been enhanced to the peak of human perfection and beyond. He was taller, stronger, faster, capable of feats that would seem superhuman to the person he had been. His two hearts beat with the genetic legacy of Sanguinius himself, and his blood carried the same gift and curse that all blood angels bore. The red thirst, the desire for blood that lurked in every son of the angel, and the black rage, the genetic flaw that could at any moment overwhelm a blood angel's mind with visions of their Primarch's death, transforming them into a berserker who knew only fury and the need to kill. Dante served as a battle brother, learning the arts of war under the tutelage of his superiors. He became a brother sergeant, leading a squad of his fellow Space Marines into combat. He rose to become captain of the 5th Company in 753 IM-40, demonstrating tactical acumen and leadership qualities that marked him as exceptional even among the Blood Angels. But his greatest test came during the Callias insurrection, a rebellion that threatened to tear the chapter apart from within. The details of the Callias insurrection remain shrouded in secrecy, but its outcome was catastrophic for the Blood Angels' leadership. Every captain save Dante was slain during the conflict, leaving the chapter leaderless at a moment of supreme crisis. Dante was elevated to chapter master not because he sought the position or because he was the most qualified candidate, but because he was the only captain left alive. He was approximately 300 years old at the time, young by Space Marine standards, and he suddenly found himself responsible for the fate of one of the Imperium's most legendary chapters. That was over 1100 years ago. Dante has served as chapter master of the Blood Angels for longer than most chapters have existed. He has led them through wars that would have broken lesser organizations, maintained their honor and their strength through centuries of unending conflict. He has become the Blood Angels in a way that transcends mere leadership. When common Imperial citizens speak of the sons of Sanguinius, they often picture Dante's golden mask, imagining that all Blood Angels look like the legendary chapter master who has saved them time and time again. The catalog of Dante's military campaigns reads like a history of the 41st millennium itself. He has fought on every type of battlefield imaginable, from hive cities where millions live stacked atop one another in towers that scrape the clouds, to dead worlds where nothing lives except the enemies of mankind, to space hulks drifting through the void carrying ancient horrors in their twisted corridors. He has led strikes against orc warbands, chaos cults, tyrannid hive fleets, Necron tomb worlds, and Dark Eldar raiding parties. Each campaign has added another layer to his legend, another story told by survivors who witnessed the Golden Angel descending from the sky to bring salvation. But of all his victories, none is more famous than the Second War for Armageddon in 941 M41. The industrial world of Armageddon, a hive world whose manufactorums produce weapons and vehicles for the Imperial war machine, came under attack by the largest orc invasion ever recorded. The warlord Ghazghkull Mag-Uruk Thraka, a beast of such cunning and ferocity that he would later be recognized as one of the greatest threats to Imperial security in the entire galaxy, descended upon Armageddon with a wah of millions of greenskins intent on turning the planet into a charred ruin. The Imperial response was massive but disorganized. Dozens of regiments of Imperial Guard were deployed alongside Space Marine chapters, including the Blood Angels, Salamanders, and Ultramarines. The planetary governor, Hermann von Straub, was supposed to coordinate the defense, but he proved to be incompetent and corrupt. more concerned with protecting his own political position than with actually defeating the Orc invasion. His poor decisions resulted in catastrophic casualties as Imperial forces were thrown piecemeal against the Orc horde without proper coordination or support. Dante had been sent to Armageddon with a relatively small contingent of Blood Angels, but when he saw how the defense was being mismanaged, he made a decision that would have been unthinkable for most Space Marine commanders. He took command of all Imperial forces on Armageddon, overriding the authority of the planetary governor and even superseding the command structures of other Space Marine chapters. This was an act of breathtaking audacity, the kind of decision that could have resulted in his censure or even excommunication if it had failed. Space Marines do not typically interfere in the command structures of Imperial Guard forces, and they certainly do not override the authority of other chapter masters. But Dante's reputation was already such that when he announced he was taking command, the other Imperial commanders accepted his authority. Logan Grimnar of the Space Wolves, Tushan of the Salamanders, and even Marneus Calgar of the Ultramarines, one of the most respected chapter masters in the entire Imperium, acknowledged Dante's right to lead. They recognized that the defense of Armageddon required a single guiding intelligence, and that Dante possessed the tactical genius and absolute certainty of purpose necessary to coordinate the massive military forces arrayed against the Orc invasion. One of Dante's first acts as overall commander was to arrest Governor von Straub and place him in custody. This was technically an act of treason against the established imperial hierarchy. But Dante understood that von Straub's continued presence would doom Armageddon. The governor was removed from power, and Dante instituted a new command structure that actually coordinated the various imperial forces into a coherent defensive strategy rather than allowing them to fight as disconnected units. The battle for Armageddon raged for months, a grinding war of attrition where every Hive city became a fortress and every street became a killing ground. The Orcs fought with the savage enthusiasm that characterized their species, throwing themselves at Imperial defensive positions, with complete disregard for casualties. For every greenskin killed, 2 more seemed to appear, boiling up from the planetary surface in an endless green tide that threatened to overwhelm the defenders through sheer numbers. Dante's tactical genius was on full display during this campaign. He recognized that the Orcs, despite their savage nature, were being coordinated by Ghazghkull with a level of strategic sophistication that was unusual for their species. The war boss was not simply throwing his forces at random targets, but was conducting a campaign designed to capture specific strategic objectives that would cripple Imperial defensive capabilities. Dante countered this by identifying Ghazghkull's actual objectives and reinforcing them before the Orcs could strike, turning what should have been easy targets into death traps that destroyed Orc forces piecemeal. The decisive moment of the campaign came at Hive Tartarus, where Ghazghkull had concentrated the bulk of his forces for a massive assault that would have broken the Imperial defense entirely if it had succeeded. Dante gathered every available Space Marine drop pod and organized a mass assault directly into the heart of the Orc army. This was an incredibly risky maneuver, dropping valuable Space Marines directly into the center of an enemy force that outnumbered them hundreds to 1. A single tactical mistake could have resulted in the annihilation of several entire companies of Space Marines, losses that would have taken decades to replace. But Dante's timing was perfect. The drop pods crashed down exactly as the Orcs were massing for their assault, disrupting their formations and killing their leaders before they could react. The Space Marines deployed in the midst of the enemy army and began systematically destroying the Orc command structure, targeting war bosses and their immediate subordinates with ruthless efficiency. Without coordination from their leaders, the Orc army dissolved into a chaotic brawl as different mobs turned on each other or simply charged in random directions, seeking enemies to fight. The Blood Angels led the assault, their red armor gleaming in the fires of battle as they carved through the Orc ranks like angels of death, given physical form. Dante was at the front of the charge, his Death Mask of Sanguinius marking him as the chapter master, his axe mortalis cutting down any Orc brave or stupid enough to stand against him. Witnesses reported that he seemed to be everywhere at once, appearing wherever the fighting was thickest to rally Imperial forces or to personally slay Orc leaders who threatened to reorganize their fractured forces. The Battle of Hive Tartarus broke the back of the Orc invasion. While Ghazghkull himself escaped to fight another day, his army was scattered and demoralized, no longer capable of mounting coordinated assaults against Imperial positions. The war for Armageddon would continue for years, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. Dante had saved the planet through a combination of brilliant strategy, personal courage, and the willingness to make hard decisions that other commanders would have hesitated over. This was far from Dante's only legendary victory. He fought the bloodthirster Scarbrand, greatest of all Khorne's demons save for Angrath himself, at the gates of Pandemonium and cleaved the creature in two with a single blow of his power axe. He drove Orc invaders from 12 worlds of the Blackfang sector in a campaign that lasted 3 decades, systematically hunting down and destroying every greenskin presence until the region was completely cleansed. He participated in the Ultima Materia Crusade and the liberation of Canau, operations that brought dozens of worlds back into the Imperial fold. In 955-41, Dante fought against the Silent King of the Necrons during the Gehenna campaign, battling one of the most ancient and powerful beings in the galaxy for 3 solid weeks. The Silent King was leading his soulless legions in an attempt to harvest biological matter from Imperial worlds, and Dante stood as one of the few commanders capable of understanding and countering Necron tactics. The campaign ended inconclusively with both forces withdrawing after suffering unacceptable casualties. But Dante had proven that even the ancient Necrons could be fought to a standstill by a sufficiently skilled Imperial commander. During the Cryptus campaign, Dante led a delaying action against Hive Fleet Leviathan, one of the largest Tyranid invasion forces ever encountered. He knew that the Blood Angels alone could not stop the Hive Fleet, but he could slow it down, buying time for other Imperial forces to mobilize and for civilian populations to be evacuated from worlds in the Tyranids' path. This was warfare at its most brutal and thankless, fighting battles where victory was measured not in territory gained but in time purchased with blood. The weight of 1,500 years sits upon his shoulders like a physical burden, growing heavier with each passing decade. The lore describes how he has seen the Imperium's situation deteriorate, watched as humanity loses ground on countless fronts, witnessed the slow but measurable decline in territory, technology, and hope. Yet he continues to fight, sustained by the prophecy in the scrolls of Sanguinius. He dreams of the Golden Warrior standing before the Golden Throne in humanity's final hour, and believes with absolute certainty that this warrior is him. This belief provides purpose when weariness threatens to overcome him, giving meaning to centuries of service that might otherwise feel futile. In the closing years of the 41st millennium, as the galaxy convulsed with wars that dwarfed anything seen since the Horus Heresy, Dante received intelligence that chilled even his ancient heart. Hive Fleet Leviathan, the largest Tyranid swarm ever encountered, was changing course. Instead of continuing its advance through the galactic east, consuming worlds in its path with the mindless hunger that characterized all Tyranid hive fleets, Leviathan had split, A massive tendril, perhaps the largest concentration of tyrannid organisms ever observed by Imperial forces, was heading directly for Baal. The homeworld of the Blood Angels was under threat of complete annihilation. This was not a raiding force or a splinter fleet. This was a concentration of Xenos horror sufficient to sterilize entire sectors. An invasion force that had already consumed dozens of worlds and was showing no signs of slowing. The Krypton Shield, a network of fortress worlds and Imperial Navy battle groups that had been established to contain Leviathan's advance, collapsed in 998 M41. The Tyranids poured through the breach, and every strategic calculation suggested they would reach Baal within months. Dante made a decision that only a chapter master of his authority and reputation could make. He sent out the call to every successor chapter of the Blood Angels, every chapter that carried the gene seed of Sanguinius in their bodies. He called them home, summoned them to defend their spiritual homeworld against the greatest threat any of them had ever faced. This was unprecedented. The Blood Angels and their successors had fought together many times throughout history, but never had the entire bloodline been gathered in one place for a single purpose. They came. By the tens of thousands they came. The Flesh-Tearers arrived first, led by their savage chapter master Gabriel Seth, bringing every battle brother who could be spared from their own wars. The Blood Drinkers came, and the Angels Vermilion, and the Angels in Carmine, the Carmine Blades and the Angels Excelsis and the Golden Suns. The Knights of Blood came, despite being declared renegade by the High Lords of Terra, unable to ignore the call when their Primarch's legacy was at stake. Chapters that had not fought side by side since the Scouring put aside old grudges and territorial disputes to stand together against the Tyrannid threat. Only the Lamenters did not answer Dante's call, that most cursed of chapters, and even then only because they were on a penitent crusade on the far side of the galaxy with no way to reach Baal in time. In total, nearly 30,000 Space Marines gathered at Baal, the largest concentration of the Sons of Sanguinius since the Horus Heresy 10,000 years before. It was an army that should have been capable of conquering entire sectors, a force of transhuman warriors whose combined experience and firepower dwarfed most Imperial military assets. They were going to need every single one of them. The Tyrannid fleet that approached Baal numbered over 50,000 bioships, living vessels grown from organic matter and driven by the incomprehensible hunger of the hive mind. These were not conventional spacecraft, but organisms the size of mountains. Creatures whose very existence violated the laws of physics as humanity understood them. Some of the largest were themselves capable of spawning entire swarms of smaller organisms, floating wombs that could birth millions of Tyrannid warriors directly into combat. The Blood Angels' fleet moved to meet them. 21 battle barges, each a cathedral of war capable of cracking planetary surfaces with its weapons. 94 strike cruisers, the backbone of Space Marine naval power. Hundreds of smaller vessels, escorts and destroyers and rapid strike craft. The Master of Fleet Bellerophon organized the defense into 4 battle groups, positioning them to create overlapping fields of fire that would maximize the effectiveness of Imperial firepower against the approaching swarm. The space battle that followed was apocalyptic in scope. The Imperial fleet fought with the desperate fury of warriors defending their homeworld, their weapons carving holes in the Tyrannid swarm with every salvo. Battle barges fired nova cannons that could vaporize entire clusters of bioships, creating expanding spheres of destruction that lit up the void like newborn stars. Strike cruisers maneuvered in coordinated formations, their broadsides hammering at the Tyrannid vessels with sustained bombardments that should have shattered any conventional fleet. The Tyranids absorbed the losses and kept coming. For every bioship destroyed, 3 more pushed forward to take its place. The hive mind had committed overwhelming force to this assault, understanding on some level that Baal represented a target of supreme importance. The defense fleet managed to destroy over 300 of the largest hive ships, a feat that would have been celebrated as one of the greatest naval victories in Imperial history under any other circumstances. But it was not enough. One by one, the Imperial vessels were isolated and destroyed. Battle barges that had served the Blood Angels for thousands of years were overwhelmed by swarms of smaller organisms that latched onto their hulls and bored through their armor, spilling boarding parties into their corridors. Strike cruisers were torn apart by bioplasma weapons that melted their void shields and reduced their adamantium hulls to molten slag. The defenders fought to the last, Space Marines manning gun batteries until their ships were torn apart around them. But the outcome was inevitable from the moment the Tyranid fleet's true size became apparent. The survivors of the naval battle retreated to Baal and its 2 moons, preparing for the ground war that they knew would determine the fate of the system. Dante organized the defense with the methodical precision that came from 15 centuries of military experience. The fortifications built during the Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy were recommissioned and reinforced. Artillery batteries were positioned to cover every approach. Every Space Marine who could hold a bolter was assigned a firing position. Servo skulls and automated defense systems were activated, creating overlapping kill zones that would turn the landscape into an abattoir for the Tyranid swarms. It was not enough. It was never going to be enough. The Tyranids descended upon Baal like a living nightmare, waves of chittering horror that crashed against the Imperial defenses with the inevitability of a rising tide. Hormagaunts and termagants came first, disposable chaff meant to absorb ammunition and identify defensive strongpoints. Then came the warriors, the Tyranid equivalent of Space Marines, creatures designed specifically to kill the Emperor's finest. Then came the monstrous creatures, the Carnifexes and Tyrannofexes, living tanks whose bioweapons could shatter ceramite armor with contemptuous ease. 19 times the Tyranids attacked in waves that grew larger with each iteration. 19 times the Space Marines held the line, their bolters speaking death to the Xenos' abominations, their chain swords and power weapons cutting through chitin and flesh. The bodies of Tyranid organisms piled up in drifts around the defensive positions, creating walls of dead flesh that the living had to climb over to reach the defenders. The stench was overwhelming, a charnel reek of alien biochemistry that permeated everything. Of chapter masters fell during the defense of Baal. 3 died in the Dome of Angels, the great chamber where the most sacred relics of the Blood Angels were kept. They had made their stand there, refusing to allow the Tyranids to defile the legacy of Sanguinius. And they held until the end, dying with bolter in hand and curses on their lips. The other 2 fell in different parts of the fortress monastery, overwhelmed by Tyranid numbers or brought down by the larger organisms whose very presence on the battlefield changed the nature of combat. The Tyranids infiltrated the fortress monastery through a derelict maintenance tunnel that should have been sealed centuries ago. A lictor, one of the Tyranids' stealth organisms, used the tunnel to bypass the outer defenses and attack the void shield generator from within. The shields failed, leaving entire sections of the fortress exposed to direct orbital bombardment from the bioships still circling Baal. Simultaneously, Genestealers that had been hiding in the lower levels for years, waiting for this moment, erupted from the shadows and massacred the neophytes who had been sheltering in the Hall of Sarcophagi. The situation became untenable. The fortress monastery, which had stood for 10,000 years as a symbol of the Blood Angels' power and endurance, was being overrun. Dante gathered every Space Marine still capable of fighting and made a decision that would have seemed insane to anyone who did not understand the depths of his desperation. He ordered the survivors to induct themselves into the Death Company. The Death Company was where blood angels who had succumbed to the Black Rage were sent, warriors whose minds had been overwhelmed by visions of Sanguinius's death. They believed they were their Primarch in his final moments aboard the Vengeful Spirit, fighting Horus in a battle they could never win. Death Company Marines were among the most savage and effective warriors in the Blood Angels' arsenal, but they were also completely uncontrollable. Living weapons who could not be commanded or reasoned with, only pointed at the enemy and released. The remaining 2,000 Space Marines painted their armor black with soot and ash and blood. They removed their chapter badges and covered themselves with the markings of death. They opened their minds to the Black Rage, letting the genetic curse that they had fought against their entire lives consume them completely. They became something more than Space Marines and less than human. Warriors who existed only to kill, driven by rage and grief and the psychic imprint of their Primarch's final moments. Dante led them. He should have been immune to the Black Rage by virtue of his age and experience, but he opened himself to it anyway, letting the fury wash over him while maintaining just enough control to direct the force he had created. Even in their rage, the Blood Angels recognized him, following the Golden Warrior who led them not because they understood tactics anymore, but because something fundamental in their transformed minds recognized him as their leader. They charged directly into the heart of the Tyrannid swarm. 2,000 Space Marines who had become living avatars of fury and death, throwing themselves at an enemy that numbered in the millions. The prisoners from the Tower of Amareo were released as well. Blood Angels who had been locked away for crimes or failures, given one last chance to redeem themselves by dying in service to their chapter. It was a suicide charge, a final desperate throw of the dice by a chapter master who knew he had no other options left. The Swarmlord was waiting for them, the hive mind's supreme tactical organism, a creature that had been birthed and reborn hundreds of times across the galaxy, each iteration carrying the accumulated knowledge of every previous version. It stood 4 times the height of a Space Marine, its 4 arms wielding bone swords that could cleave through Terminator armor with effortless ease. Its psychic presence radiated across the battlefield like a malevolent sun, coordinating the Tyrannid swarm with a level of tactical sophistication that should have been impossible for such creatures. Dante fought his way through the swarm to reach it. His Perdition Pistol, an Inferno pistol of ancient design, burned away hordes of lesser Tyrannids that tried to stop him. His Axe Mortalis carved through warrior organisms like they were made of paper. Blood Angels fell around him, their rage-fueled strength finally meeting enemies that could match their ferocity. But Dante pushed forward with the single-minded determination that had defined his entire existence. The duel between Dante and the Swarmlord was brief and brutal. Dante's Inferno pistol fired at point-blank range, the superheated Meltablast burning away one of the Swarmlord's arms in a burst of vaporized tissue. The creature barely seemed to notice, its remaining limbs moving with blinding speed to strike at the chapter master. Dante parried with his Axe Mortalis, the power field of the weapon shattering one of the Swarmlord's bone swords. He pressed his advantage, stepping inside the creature's guard to tear out one of its eyes with his bare hand. But the Swarmlord was too powerful, too experienced, drawing upon the accumulated tactical knowledge of countless previous incarnations. Its psychic attacks hammered at Dante's mind, trying to overwhelm his consciousness with the alien thoughts of the hive mind. Its remaining bone sword struck through a gap in Dante's ancient armor, penetrating his chest cavity and destroying his secondary heart. The blade's molecular structure had been designed specifically to defeat Space Marine physiology, releasing toxins that would have killed a normal human instantly. Dante felt death approaching. His armor's auto-sealant systems tried to foam around the wound, but the Swarmlord's blade had pierced so deeply that the sealant actually bonded with the weapon, locking it in place inside Dante's chest. He could feel his primary heart struggling to compensate for the loss of the secondary, could feel the poison spreading through his system despite his enhanced metabolism's attempts to neutralize it. He was dying, finally, after 15 centuries of war that should have killed him 1,000 times before. He fired his perdition pistol directly into the Swarmlord's face at point-blank range. The melta-beam vaporized the creature's head and upper torso, reducing the hive mind's supreme creation to ash and superheated vapor. The Swarmlord collapsed, its massive body toppling backward as the psychic connection to the hive mind was severed. Around the battlefield, tyrannid organisms faltered as the loss of such a powerful synapse creature created gaps in their coordination. Dante collapsed as well, falling to his knees among the bodies of his brothers and the Xenos filth they had died fighting. The bone sword was still embedded in his chest, its toxins still spreading through his system. He tried to stand and failed, his enhanced physiology finally reaching the limits of what it could endure. He was going to die here, on the surface of his homeworld, surrounded by the dead. After 1,500 years, he was finally going to find the peace he had been denied for so long. That was when the vision came. Dante saw the Sanguinor first, the golden guardian angel of the blood angels standing before him with wings of pure light. Then he saw Sanguinius himself, not as the Primarch had been in life, but as he appeared in the dreams and visions of all blood angels. Beautiful and terrible, a being of such perfect grace that merely looking upon him was painful. The Primarch spoke to Dante, and his voice was like the song of angels given form. He told his son that he had earned the right to rest, that no warrior in the history of the blood angels had served longer or more faithfully. He said that Dante was the greatest of his sons, the one who had surpassed even Ghazghkull, the first chapter master in dedication and sacrifice. He offered Dante peace, the eternal rest that the ancient warrior craved more than anything else in the galaxy. Dante wept. After 15 centuries of presenting a facade of strength to those who looked to him for leadership, after maintaining his composure through battles that would have broken lesser men, he broke down and cried like a child. He begged Sanguinius to let him die. He pleaded with his Primarch to release him from the burden of continued existence, to allow him to finally rest after 1,500 years of war and suffering. He had done enough, sacrificed enough, lost enough. Surely he had earned the right to stop fighting. Sanguinius smiled sadly and shook his head. He told Dante that his time was not yet done, that the prophecy in the scrolls had not yet come to pass. The Golden Warrior had not yet stood in the final hour. There was more work to do, more battles to fight, more years to endure. The Primarch reached out and touched Dante's chest where the bone sword had pierced it, and power flooded into the dying warrior's body. Not healing, not exactly, but a surge of vitality that forced his failing organs to keep functioning despite the damage they had sustained. Dante woke on the battlefield, screaming in rage and despair at the cruel joke that had been played on him. He had been so close to finally finding peace, and it had been snatched away at the last moment. He nearly succumbed to a complete mental breakdown, his mind threatening to shatter under the weight of this final betrayal. But around him, his brothers were still fighting, still dying, and he could not abandon them even in his moment of ultimate suffering. The battle for Baal was not over. Even as Dante struggled to his feet, even as he pulled the bone sword from his chest with hands that shook from shock and exhaustion, the nature of the conflict was changing in ways that no one could have predicted. Light years away, the fortress world of Cadia was falling. The 13th Black Crusade had finally succeeded, and Abaddon the Despoiler was about to tear reality itself apart. The Great Rift opened, a wound in space itself stretching from the Eye of Terror to the Hadex anomaly on the far side of the galaxy, creating a permanent storm of warp energy that split the Imperium in two. Time stopped having meaning as the Immaterium bled into reality, creating temporal distortions that meant the battle on Baal might have lasted weeks by the participants' reckoning, but years from Terra's perspective, or vice versa. The Tyranid fleet was caught in the formation of the rift. Millions of bioships were sucked into the Immaterium, torn apart by demonic entities that had no interest in the slow consumption that the hive mind represented. The synapse network connecting the Tyranid organisms on Baal to the hive mind was severed, leaving the swarm leaderless and confused. But even as the Tyranid threat diminished, a new one emerged. Demonic legions materialized on Baal Prime, the larger of the two moons. Kabanda, the greatest bloodthirster of Khorne, a demon that had plagued the Blood Angels since the Horus heresy itself, arrived leading an army of warp entities. The demon declared that only he would have the honor of destroying the sons of Sanguinius, that no mere Xenos would be permitted to claim that prize. He carved a symbol on the surface of Baal Prime using Tyranid skulls, an 8-pillared representation of Khorne that could be seen from orbit. Every defender on Baal Prime was slaughtered, Space Marines and Tyranids alike dying to the demon's fury. The Legion of the Damned arrived, those mysterious warriors of flame and shadow, Space Marines who had died but continued to fight for the Emperor, manifested on the battlefield to combat the demonic incursion. The Sanguinor appeared as well, fighting alongside the exhausted defenders against enemies that now came from two fronts simultaneously. Then the sky tore open again, and salvation arrived in the form of a Primarch. Roboute Guilliman, returned from 10,000 years of stasis, led the Indomitus Crusade to Baal. His fleet emerged from the warp carrying reinforcements that should have been impossible. Primaris Space Marines, a new generation of warriors created by Archmagos Belisarius Call using enhanced gene seed, deployed alongside the exhausted defenders. Their Mark II Call pattern bolt rifles spoke death to the Tyranids in patterns of fire that were more efficient and devastating than anything the original Space Marines could produce. The Tyranids were still overwhelming in number, but without the Swarmlord to coordinate them and with the hive mind's connection severed by the rift, they were reduced to mindless killing machines without strategy or purpose. Guilliman's arrival turned the tide, his tactical genius and the fresh forces he brought with him, finally tipping the balance. The battle for Baal would continue for months more, clearing the planet and its moons of the remaining Tyranid organisms, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. Dante knelt before Guilliman when the Primarch came to inspect the devastation. The chapter master, ancient beyond measure and weary beyond description, offered his apologies for failing to save Baal. He had lost 5 chapter masters, thousands of his brothers, and allowed the fortress monastery to be overrun. He had failed in his duty, and he expected censure or worse from the returned son of the Emperor. Guilliman looked down at this ancient warrior, this man who had fought for 1,500 years, who had just led a suicidal charge against impossible odds and somehow survived, who bore a wound that should have killed him but was still standing through sheer force of will. The Primarch told Dante to stand, that he above all others had earned the right to stand beside a Primarch as an equal. Guilliman said that Dante had not failed to save Baal. He had succeeded in saving half the galaxy by stopping Hive Fleet Leviathan's largest tendril at the cost of only one system. Then Roboute Guilliman made a decision that would reshape the fate of the Imperium. He named Commander Dante Lord Regent of Imperium Nihilus, effective ruler of the entire dark half of the galaxy that had been cut off by the Great Rift. The Great Rift, known by 100 names across the Imperium, is a wound in reality that splits the galaxy from one side to the other. The Chaos Forces call it the Crimson Path, seeing in it the manifestation of their dark god's victory over the material universe. To Imperial citizens, it is the mouth of ruin, the warp scar, the Dathedian. On Fenris, the Space Wolves call it simply the Everdusk, a permanent darkness that has swallowed half the sky. The Tau, with their typical clinical precision, name it Montieva, which translates roughly to the Devourer of Hope. The Rift divides the Imperium into two regions that are effectively separate empires. On one side is Imperium Sanctus, the blessed side, where Terra and Mars still stand and where the light of the Astronomicon can still guide ships through the warp. On the other side is Imperium Nihilus, the Dark Imperium, where the Emperor's light cannot reach, and where warp travel has become even more dangerous and unpredictable than it was before. Temporal distortions plague the entire region. Some worlds experienced centuries passing in what felt like moments, entire populations aging and dying before they understood what was happening to them. Other worlds were frozen in time, their inhabitants unaware that the galaxy beyond their skies had changed fundamentally. The Noctis Eterna, the Blackness, claimed countless systems whose populations went mad from exposure to warp phenomena that should never have touched the material universe. Communication across the rift is nearly impossible. Astropaths who attempt to send messages from Nihilus to Sanctus or vice versa often die in the attempt, their minds shattered by the psychic turbulence that makes the rift an impassable barrier to telepathic communication. Those few messages that do make it through are often garbled or fragmented, arriving months or years after they were sent, carrying intelligence that is no longer relevant to the situations they describe. Only a handful of stable passages exist through the rift. The Nachmund Gauntlet, near the Eye of Terror, is the most well-known, though calling it stable is generous. It is a corridor of relative safety through which ships can travel from one side of the rift to the other, though the journey remains extraordinarily dangerous and many vessels that attempt the crossing are lost. The gauntlet is watched over by the fortress world of Vigilus, which has become one of the most strategically important locations in the entire Imperium, due to its position controlling access to this vital passage. Later, another passage called the Attilan Gate was discovered, but it is even more dangerous than the Nachmund Gauntlet. This is the realm that Dante was given to govern, half the Imperium cut off from Terra, drowning in darkness, besieged on all sides by enemies who sense weakness and move to exploit it. Millions of worlds crying out for aid that cannot reach them. Billions of Imperial citizens facing annihilation, with no hope of reinforcement or rescue. It is a territory so vast that 1,000 chapter masters could not adequately defend it, and Guilliman gave it to one man who was already carrying the weight of 15 centuries. Dante accepted the burden without hesitation, though he understood immediately what it meant. He would be responsible for the fate of half of humanity, making decisions that would determine whether entire sectors lived or died. He would have authority over all Imperial forces in Imperium Nihilus, able to command Space Marine chapters, Imperial Guard regiments, and even Inquisitors if necessary. But with that authority came responsibility that was almost incomprehensible in scope. Before Dante could even begin to organize the defense of Imperium Nihilus, he had to survive one more transformation. The Primaris Space Marines that Guilliman had brought with him represented the future of the Adeptus Astartes. Warriors enhanced beyond even the capabilities of original Space Marines. Archmagos Belisarius Call had developed a procedure by which existing Space Marines could be upgraded to Primaris status, receiving additional organs and genetic enhancements that would make them stronger, faster, and more resilient. The procedure was called the Rubicon Primaris, or sometimes the Calgarisian Rites after Marneus Calgar, who had been the first chapter master to successfully undergo the transformation. It was extraordinarily dangerous, with early failure rates exceeding 60%. The surgery took days to complete, during which the Space Marine was cut open from crown to heels, their ribcage cracked open to expose their internal organs. Their healing physiology had to be suppressed almost to the point of death to prevent their bodies from trying to repair the damage faster than the surgeons could work. 3 new organs were implanted. The Magnificat, buried deep in the brain, stimulated growth and intensified the function of all other organs. The Belisarian Furnace, a marvel of biological engineering, was designed to release hypersteroids and corticostimulants when the Space Marine received a mortal wound, giving them one final burst of strength before death. The sinew coils, cables of durasteel that encased the warrior's tendons and sinews, providing resilience and strength beyond what even Space Marine musculature could achieve. The final step was the most dangerous. The surgeons had to reactivate all the Space Marines' existing organs, essentially forcing their body to restart after being brought to the very edge of death. Many warriors never woke from this process, their bodies unable to handle the trauma of being rebuilt from the inside out. Those who did survive had to fight their way back to consciousness, their Belisarian Furnace activating to provide the surge of energy needed to awaken their newly enhanced physiology. Dante survived. Of course he survived. Death continued to elude him no matter how many times it came calling. He emerged from the surgery larger and more powerful than before, his already legendary combat capabilities enhanced to even greater heights. His armor, his death mask, his axe mortalis, and his perdition pistol were all upscaled to accommodate his new massive frame. He received modified Mark X armor and an upgraded jump pack that could propel his enhanced body with even greater speed and precision. But the surgery left visible scars, marks on his flesh that even his enhanced healing could not completely erase. They were reminders of how close he had come to death during the procedure, physical evidence of the price he had paid to become something more than he had been. He was now over 1,500 years old and had undergone a surgery that most Space Marines would have been too young and inexperienced to survive. He had been rebuilt yet again, transformed yet again, denied the peace of death yet again. Dante threw himself into his new role with the same dedication he had brought to every other duty in his long existence. He could not allow himself to contemplate the magnitude of what had been asked of him, could not afford to think about the impossibility of the task before him. He simply began doing the work, making the decisions, organizing the response to countless crises that were erupting simultaneously across half the galaxy. His first major campaign as Lord Regent was the Angel's Halo operation, a massive offensive designed to retake the Red Scar region from the remnants of Hive Fleet Leviathan that had survived the devastation of Baal. The Tyranids in this area were leaderless and disorganized following the loss of the Swarmlord and the severance of their connection to the hive mind. But they were still dangerous, still consuming worlds and building toward critical mass that would allow them to threaten surrounding systems. Dante coordinated the efforts of multiple Space Marine chapters, hundreds of Imperial Guard regiments, and elements of the Imperial Navy in a campaign that stretched across dozens of star systems. It required logistics on a scale that would have been challenging even with reliable warp travel and astropathic communication. In Imperium Nihilus, where both of those things were compromised, it should have been impossible. But Dante managed it through a combination of brilliant planning and the willingness to make hard decisions about which systems could be saved and which had to be abandoned to their fate. He began working to transform Baal itself into a secondary capital for Imperium Nihilus, a fortress from which the defense of the entire Dark Imperium could be coordinated. The fortress monastery was rebuilt and reinforced, expanded to accommodate not just the Blood Angels but representatives from other chapters and branches of imperial governance. New manufactorums were established to produce the weapons and equipment needed for the endless wars that raged across the region. Training facilities were expanded to accommodate the influx of new recruits that the Blood Angels were receiving as Guilliman's reforms took effect. But the work was overwhelming. Every day brought new reports of disasters that Dante could not prevent, worlds falling to chaos or Tyranids or Orcs or Necrons or Dark Eldar. Populations crying out for aid that would never arrive because there simply were not enough forces to respond to every crisis. Dante found himself having to make choices that haunted him, deciding which worlds would receive reinforcements and which would be left to die, calculating the strategic value of different systems, and determining where resources could be most effectively deployed. He was one man trying to hold together half an empire that was collapsing under the weight of its own dysfunction. The Imperium had never been efficient even at the best of times, but in Nihilus, without effective communication or coordination, it was barely functioning at all. Local governors made decisions based on incomplete information or their own self-interest. Space Marine chapters operated independently, pursuing their own agendas without regard for larger strategic considerations. The Imperial Guard regiments were scattered across the region without overall coordination, fighting battles that might or might not serve any useful purpose. Dante understood that his mission was, in his own words, honorable yet impossible. He could not save Imperium Nihilus. The forces available to him were insufficient for the task, the logistical challenges were insurmountable, and the strategic situation was deteriorating faster than he could respond to it. But he also understood that someone had to try, that the alternative to making the attempt was to simply abandon half the Imperium to whatever fate the galaxy had in store for it. During the Arcs of Omen campaign, Dante met another returned Primarch. Lion L. Johnson, the legendary first Primarch, emerged from 10,000 years in the warp to find a galaxy that had changed beyond recognition. The Lion was initially disturbed to see someone wearing the Death Mask of Sanguinius, his brother Primarch, but he quickly came to respect Dante after learning of his service and sacrifice. When Dante faced the demon Primarch Angron at the Battle of Idolatros, it was the Lion who saved him, appearing at the crucial moment to drive back the embodiment of Khorne's rage. The Lion's return brought hope to the defenders of Imperium Nihilus, proof that the Emperor's sons were returning to lead humanity in its darkest hour. But it also highlighted just how desperate the situation had become. The fact that Primarchs, beings who had been absent for 10 millennia, were needed to address the current crises, spoke to the magnitude of the threats facing the Imperium. Dante informed the Lion that Guilliman had kept the Imperium intact during his absence, that the administrative and military structure of the Imperium had survived 10,000 years because of the systems the returned Lord Commander had maintained and reformed. There is a profound irony in Commander Dante's existence. He is simultaneously the most successful Space Marine chapter master in Imperial history and the most burdened. His victories span 15 centuries and include some of the most significant military triumphs since the Horus Heresy. He has saved worlds that would have been lost without his intervention, inspired generations of warriors through his example, and demonstrated repeatedly that even the darkest situations can be overcome through skill, determination, and absolute dedication to duty. The lore reveals a darker truth beneath these triumphs. Dante's longevity has come at a tremendous psychological cost. The most telling moment comes during the devastation of Baal, when he lay dying after defeating the Swarmlord. In his vision of Sanguinius, he literally begged his Primarch to let him die, openly weeping and pleading for the rest that had been denied him for so long. This is documented, not speculation. The ancient warrior who inspires billions actively sought death as release from his burden. The prophecy in the scrolls of Sanguinius provides his reason to continue. It speaks of a golden warrior who will stand in the final hour, and Dante believes with absolute certainty that this warrior is him. This belief, combined with his unshakable sense of duty, keeps him fighting through the weariness. He has accumulated 15 centuries of experience watching the Imperium's strategic situation deteriorate, witnessing the slow erosion of territory and capability, observing threats multiply faster than they can be eliminated. Yet when Sanguinius told him, "Your time is not yet done," and poured strength back into his dying body, Dante accepted this burden and continued his service. He refuses to yield, not necessarily because he believes victory is certain, but because yielding contradicts everything he is. The prophecy says a golden warrior will stand in the final hour, and he will fulfill that role regardless of what it costs him. This makes him both inspiring and tragic, a warrior who continues not from hope of victory but from absolute dedication to duty. The Death Mask of Sanguinius has become more than a symbol to Dante. Records indicate he wears it almost constantly, removing it only for the most private moments, and sometimes not even then. Given the mask's prominence in every documented appearance and the way Imperial citizens across the galaxy recognize it as synonymous with Dante himself, we can understand how the line between the man and the image he projects has blurred over 15 centuries. The boy who was Luis Dante from the Salt clans of Baal Secundus existed so long ago that the connection to who he has become feels increasingly distant. What remains is the chapter master, the Lord Regent, the living legend who exists as much as an idea as an actual person. To the common citizens of the Imperium, Dante is a figure of myth. They tell stories of the golden warrior who descends from the heavens in their darkest hour, who fights with the fury of an angel and the wisdom of a saint. Children grow up hearing tales of his victories, learning that no matter how desperate the situation becomes, the Emperor will send his greatest champion to save them. He is hope made manifest, proof that the Imperium can prevail against any threat. To his fellow Space Marines, Dante is something else. He is the elder statesman, the voice of experience that spans centuries when most chapters are lucky to have a single veteran who has served for more than 300 years. Other chapter masters seek his counsel on matters of strategy and doctrine, recognizing that his accumulated knowledge represents an irreplaceable resource. Logan Grimnar of the Space Wolves, himself one of the oldest and most respected chapter masters in the Imperium, treats Dante as an equal and sometimes as a superior. Marneus Calgar of the Ultramarines, who holds the theoretical position of greatest authority among all chapter masters due to his chapter's prestige and lineage from Guilliman, acknowledges Dante's practical supremacy through sheer length of service. But the ancient warrior carries a burden that few can comprehend. 15 centuries of war have left their mark not just on his body, but on his spirit. The lore tells us he presents enthusiasm and determination to those who look to him for leadership, maintaining the facade that his brothers need to see. Yet we know from his own recorded thoughts that weariness runs deep, that the accumulation of loss and trauma across such an impossible span of years weighs heavily upon him. It's a burden he bears in silence, understanding that his role demands he projects strength even when exhaustion threatens to overwhelm him. His perspective on Xenos and the Imperium itself shows unusual pragmatism for an Imperial commander. The historical records reveal instances where he's cooperated with Xenos races when circumstances demanded it, judging situations on practical merits rather than defaulting to the absolute xenophobic hostility that characterizes most Imperial leadership. This suggests a flexibility born from 15 centuries of experience, an understanding that survival sometimes requires uncomfortable compromises. His documented hatred for the Tyranids, however, is absolute and unwavering. Every other enemy in the galaxy possesses qualities that can be understood or anticipated. From chaos cultists to Necron tomb lords to dark Eldar raiders, they have motivations that operate within recognizable frameworks, goals that can be predicted and countered. But the Tyranids represent pure consumption, an existential threat that cannot be reasoned with, bargained with, or turned aside through any means except total destruction. When Dante looks at the Hive fleets approaching from outside the galaxy based on his recorded statements and actions, we can infer he sees them as the ultimate ending to humanity's story if they are not stopped. Yet even with this understanding, even seeing the deteriorating strategic situation across millennia of service, he continues to perform his duty without wavering. He makes the difficult decisions about which worlds can be saved and which must be abandoned. He coordinates the defense of Imperium Nihilus despite the insufficient resources available to protect even a fraction of the territory under his command. He leads from the front, appearing wherever the fighting is fiercest to inspire troops who draw strength from seeing their legendary commander standing beside them in battle. This combination of traits makes Dante's story both tragic and heroic in equal measure. The lore presents us with a warrior whose faith in ultimate victory has been eroded by 15 centuries of evidence, yet whose commitment to duty remains absolute. He continues to fight every battle as if victory were possible because that is what his role demands of him, what the Imperium needs from him. He is what the texts call the soldier of infinite sorrows and the warrior of infinite courage, carrying burdens that would crush any being less dedicated to the ideal of service. The prophecy sustains him. In his rare moments of rest, he dreams of the golden warrior standing before the golden throne, protecting the emperor from some terrible darkness. In these dreams, he finally finds peace, his duty complete, his purpose fulfilled. He dreams that after 1,500 years of war, after carrying burdens that should have destroyed him centuries ago, he will be allowed to rest. These dreams are the only comfort he has, the only thing that makes his continued existence bearable. When we think about what makes Warhammer 40,000 such a compelling setting, Commander Dante embodies many of its core themes. He represents the cost of survival in a galaxy that offers nothing but war and death and endless struggle. His story shows us how even the greatest heroes bear scars from time and experience, how victory and success measure different things, how duty carried across impossible spans of time becomes its own form of burden. The lore explicitly describes him as having served longer than any other Space Marine chapter master, witnessed more campaigns than most chapters have participated in throughout their entire histories. But he also represents something the Imperium desperately needs. The historical records show us a warrior whose loyalty transcends any calculation of odds, whose dedication persists regardless of circumstances. He demonstrates through 15 centuries of documented service that it's possible to continue the fight even when conventional wisdom would suggest surrender, that duty can motivate action even when it brings no personal reward. His leadership style, as recorded in countless after-action reports and testimonials from those who've served under him, shows that effective command is not about maintaining your own morale, but about presenting whatever face is necessary to sustain the morale of those who depend on you. Commander Dante is the oldest living space marine, the Lord Regent of Imperium Nihilus, and according to the scrolls of Sanguinius, potentially the Golden Warrior of Prophecy. He has fought for 15 centuries and shows every intention of continuing until either the prophecy is fulfilled or death claims him. He carries the responsibility for half the Imperium on his shoulders, making impossible decisions with incomplete information in a realm where most of what he tries to preserve will likely be lost anyway. He is the thin golden line standing between humanity and the darkness that threatens to consume it. A warrior who has become as much symbol as man, as much legend as reality. The historical record makes clear that his service has extracted a tremendous cost. 1,500 years of warfare, of making decisions that determine the fates of worlds, of watching brothers and allies fall while he endures, has created a burden that few beings in the galaxy could comprehend, much less bear. Yet he continues, one battle at a time, one world at a time, carrying responsibilities that should have destroyed him long ago, fighting a war whose ultimate outcome remains uncertain because the alternative is unthinkable. That is the reality of Commander Dante. That is what it means to be the oldest space marine, the greatest chapter master by virtue of sheer longevity, the warden of Imperium Nihilus. To carry the weight of half the galaxy while understanding the magnitude of what's at stake, but refusing to surrender because surrender simply isn't part of who he is. To be a legend to billions while managing the practical realities of an impossible command. To stand as proof that even in the darkest timeline imaginable, humanity can produce individuals whose dedication transcends every rational calculation, whose service continues regardless of personal cost. If you found this deep dive into Commander Dante's story compelling, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We're covering more of the 41st millennium's most fascinating characters and events, from the perspectives you won't find anywhere else. Drop a comment letting me know what other aspects of Blood Angel's lore you'd like to see explored, or which other chapters deserve this kind of comprehensive treatment. The Emperor protects, and we'll see you in the next one.